And I'm here with Dulcie and Michael Murphy, who are the founders of Track 2. And for those of you who don't know us very well, Track 2 has been actively doing citizen diplomacy work for 45 years plus. Michael and Dulcie co-founded this in 1980 after several years visiting Russia, particularly in the former Soviet states. And they continued to do their work as the Union began to come apart, and in the aftermath of the breakup of the Soviet Union. And our work was focused almost singularly on the Soviet Union in the past. And today we also include the North Pacific Rim and China in our work and the Middle East. And we've recently had a conference on the East Coast on the Middle East. So we're very active, and citizen diplomacy is non-state diplomacy. It's how we build the fabric of friendship across borders that are often contested and at state levels seem to be doing some kind of damage to our world. So we try to, provide a different way forward. I am joined here today by Lev Sviridov and Gasan Gusejnov, and we are thrilled to have both of you with us. Professor Gusejnov is the founder of the Free University in Briva. He left Russia in 2023 after an article he wrote regarding the deteriorated state of the Russian language and media forced him into exile. He has subsequently volunteered his many hours every day to teaching students across Europe, many students who are outside of Russia now, outside of Ukraine now, to make sure that these younger generations continue to have the benefit of a very good education. Professor Sviridov is the director of the Macaulay Honors College at Hunter College. It's the largest and most selective public honors college system in the City University of New York system, which I think teaches maybe a couple of 100,000 students. It's a very
300,000
large,
students.
oh, 300,000 students. So he has a very specific role in a very large institution. Prior to joining as director of Macaulay Honors College, he was a senior research fellow in the City of New York Energy Institute. They are here today to talk to us a little bit about language, about teaching, about academics, and I'm going to let them carry on from here. Thank you so much for joining. Oh, one request. If you would like to join us for future webinars, we will not have your emails. So if you wouldn't mind sending your emails to us either in the chat here today or by writing info, I-N-F-O, at trackii.com, then we can add you to our mailing list so you can be sure to hear about future webinars. Okay, thank you, and
All right. Well,
welcome to you both.
thank you, Ginger, and thank you everyone for joining us today. Certainly, it's exciting to follow in Nick's win, so hopefully today's webinar is just as exciting and informative. I will defer on the questions of language to Gasan, but we thought of structuring this conversation in really three pillars. Certainly, it's important in understanding language and understanding how language can be changed by AI and how it will influence language itself. Then we wanted to move to a more academic side of issues where what are the practical implications for AI in the academic setting, and move over to more of a question of migration and cross-border collaboration, because after all, Gasan and I, and many people on this call, have one thing in common. That is, either we or our ancestors left Russia and went somewhere else. And this human migration, the wave of human migration that we've seen in the last few years, is akin to the migration in the post-World War II world, and certainly represents a major disruption. So, what can institutions do to promote cross-border collaboration, support our students at a time of crisis, and certainly continue building on the legacy of supporting scholars and scholarship at a time of war? So, to get us thinking about what these issues are and how they can be resolved and conceived of, I want to defer to Gasan on a fundamental question of how should we contextualize AI? How should we think of it? Is it really that unprecedented?
Meeting is
Gasan?
being recorded. This meeting is being recorded.
From there is something.
All right.
There was
Gasan,
something
you're good to go.
No, with the sound, but now it's okay. First of all, dear Lev, dear Dulcie, dear Ginger, thank you so much for this invitation. It is a great honor for me. And we first met really 35 years ago and at Esselen. And it is now, for myself, it is unprecedented from the point of view for all of us, from the point of view of language, that we are talking now at once from California to actually Tbilisi, where some of my students who are present here are, or Belgrade or Tbilisi in very eastern part of Europe. And it is unbelievable. But at the same time, we cannot, and I'm trying to answer the question by Lev, we cannot say that it is all unprecedented. Firstly, because we all live, if we want it or not, we live within the model of the Greek mythological world. And this Greek mythological world is our pivotal thing in our life. All our languages, all our understanding of languages, even the understanding of the AI, artificial intelligence, are going back to Platonic philosophy and to one particular text by Plato, where Socrates says how dangerous for human being writing is, how dangerous is the discovery of this opportunity to write, to put down what we think and what we are planning, to write about our life, about our ideas. It is all dangerous because as soon as we are dead, nobody can actually verify what we did, what we wrote. And there will be a huge group of people saying that only they understand correctly what that guy wrote. And there will be wars because of what he wrote and how they interpret it. And we all know that it was true. So the revolution we live in right now is, from this particular point of view, not unprecedented. There are precedents. On the other side, what is completely, also not completely new, is the fact that, I left Russia 2020, and we founded this free university with the idea that we will help some minority students which left Russia at that time, and the majority of our internal immigrants living in Russia. And then the war started, 2022. This terrible aggression with hundreds of thousands and millions of refugees from Ukraine, from Russia, from other parts of Eastern Europe. And now we realize that this migration, this forced migration, has something to do with the with the language. There were some, let us say, linguistic mistakes that led to this tragedy. There is somebody or there is a big group of people using words and texts and images in an absolutely catastrophic way, explaining why they have the right to come into another country to get it, to say that their language is not a real one, that just a dialect of our language, and we have the right to rule there. I mean, Russia and Ukraine. And it all led to a huge wave of migration. And at the same time, and that is actually our genuine, not a problem, but it is a challenge to keep these people, the academics, the students, at the beginning, dozens of students, now hundreds of students who left their country, how to bring them together, how to give them their sciences, their humanities in their mother tongue, and at the same time, to give them the opportunity to integrate in the society where they live now. So AI, from this particular point of view, is at the same time a terrible weapon, which is used during the war, because there are drones flying with the AI and looking for targets automatically. But at the same time, AI is a fantastic instrument for teaching languages. And there is a small group of young people living in the Eastern Germany right now. And this small group created a program which helps, and this group is Azerbaijani, Armenian, Kazakh, Ukrainian, Georgian, former peoples of the Soviet Union, and they are now joined together to create a program, and they did create it, of learning new languages in the countries where they are staying, and at the same time not forgetting and expanding the knowledge of their mother tongues. These young people are using AI in a positive way. So our idea is that we have to concentrate on the fate of our young people who left, who are refugees right now, to create for them, let us say, the best possible situation in their intellectual life, in their educational trajectory, to help them not to forget the normal human language of their own, and to gain the new languages they come in. It is easy to formulate it, but it is very complicated to do it. So I'm going back to Lev. What would you say about it? Your micro.
We're 6 years into a COVID world, and I still can't unmute myself. So you've contextualized this in a very different way with a classical perspective, and it is interesting, especially now that AI models have evolved into almost like not quite a deep state, but has a deep state quality to it, where everything you do, everything you post is scrutinized, not just by people in your social media outlets, but also can be easily searched and seen by robots. So the risk, the personal risk, societal risk, the battles of intent and originality, whether it be constitutional or just what did this guy mean to say, is certainly elevated. And what I find particularly interesting in the discourse among students who I get to see every single day as we look for patterns in what one could consider normative democratic behavior, normative free speech behavior, versus the elements of censorship and exclusion, is that there's growing concern from peers, less so from figures of authority, among the next generation of students. And what I find interesting in that context is the following. And the way it plays out is a very straightforward, practical way, where when we conducted our admissions interviews, kids sit in a common waiting area and then they go into a room to talk to someone who will determine whether or not their interpersonal skills are worthy of enrollment. Um, it's an interesting dynamic where in prior years, students in the waiting room would have a robust conversation and discussion. Then they'd come into the actual interview a bit more reserved. Whereas for the last 2 years, and especially pronounced this year, there was almost complete silence, like in the doctor's office, in the waiting room, and they would sort of blossom during the interview. And when I asked some of the kids, because we're registering right now, as to what that dynamic was, they were one, afraid of being recorded saying the wrong thing. Two, were afraid of being ostracized by their peers. And three, and this is where it dovetails with Gasan's specialization, they were afraid of using the wrong language. And it's fascinating how, on both sides, especially in a time of conflict, uh, words have changed definition. And I'm a dinosaur compared to these kids and how quickly terms evolve. But how last year's fire, which was supposed to mean cool and amazing, today is a complete akin to a dumpster fire. So an exact opposite. And so these sort of evolutionary models are happening very, very quickly. And the recorded human record is getting more and more robust. But at the same time, it seems to be creating more vulnerabilities for us both as a functioning society where people are comfortable interacting with one another, and certainly the tolerance levels for seeing someone evolve, share an idea that may be off, and then you can discuss and correct with understanding and compassion have seemingly gone away. And what I would punt back to Gasan is the question, is this one of the practical implications of AI, of a recorded language? Is this what we should expect to continue? Is there something in your knowledge base and history of language development that you're aware of where such quick fluctuations at a time of crisis actually create an atmosphere of first fear? And then, if that is the case, how do we come out of it on the back end?
It is a very, very interesting and important thing you said right now. Uh, First of all, uh, I should say again, going back to our old Greek tradition or Roman tradition, language in itself is a dangerous subject. If we are afraid of something, we do not say it. And if we want something very much, we do not say it. Just apotropaic, so to say. We don't want to touch dangerous things and things we really want to have. On the other side, and that's what we are dealing with now with the AI, with this tremendous abundance of dictionaries, of words, of historical levels, of historical semantics. It is all, the abundance is unbelievable, and it never happened this way. And in this abundance, we have to learn how to forget. For example, how to forget that somebody once said something about us which was not very sympathetic. We have to forget it. We have to remember something very positive. And we have to forget something negative. But within the communication, online communication, within the communication in all these chats or former platforms, fora, and so on, the way of cursing, the way of injuring people, the way of practicing violence is multiplied. And that's the main thing recently in the discussion with the students of the Sakharov School in Israel and in Europe, named after Andrei Sakharov. There was a discussion about the main reason why so many people, young people, are talking to AI, are trying to communicate with AI much more than with their friends and colleagues. And the answer was because the AI is polite. It is friendly. The human beings are unfriendly. And the AI is polite and friendly. Well, the human beings are sometimes whimsy, they love jokes, and the AI doesn't understand jokes, but is polite and friendly. And from this particular point of view, language we really practice, we use in our everyday life, this speech we use, is sometimes so aggressive that even when I am speaking now, I feel myself that my words could be actually, somebody would say, you are very aggressive in your habitus, in the way you speak. I'm sorry about that, but I feel it. I feel that the AI on my place would have been much more quiet and much more friendly. Another important point is that people are lying, but they are not lying so full of joy, so joyfully as the AI. AI is confabulating stories and all impossible stories. We are not able to confabulate this way. But on the other side, the whole mythological tradition we have is a huge confabulation of understanding of nature. And we have somehow to deal with this lying and confabulating. How to deal with it without violence, how to deal with it without stupid banalities and repetitions, as in this famous, very old game, Just a Minute on the BBC World Service. There was this game, Just a Minute, without hesitation, repetition, and deviation. So how can we communicate without repetition, hesitation, and deviation? And without lying? We cannot do that. We have to contribute within our communication with confabulated stories, with lies, but without violence. And the whole construction is extremely unbalanced. We have, in each particular situation, we have to restore the balance. And of course, we have to avoid lying. But we live, I don't want to politicize our subject, but we live in the world where liars are the most, I would say, profiled persons in this world. Everybody knows that they are liars, and they are going on lying, lying and lying. And this is the problem of every every speech, and this is the problem of every lesson we have and we give, online or offline, it doesn't matter. So we have, within this problematic, we have to implement AI as an instrument of at once serving against or moving against violence, against lying, against deviation. And from this point of view, the AI has two qualities which are contradictory. The one quality is politeness, friendliness, and another quality is tendency to lie. So how to deal with it? That's the question.
I think you raise kind of an interesting point, which, of course, there's this constant conflict, especially in the academy, especially at times of conflict, this debate between the commitment of institutions to free speech and free inquiry. And there's the secondary premise that is held in universities, and that is the notion of responsible speech, where on one hand, university administration, certainly the state, should not interfere in the discovery of facts and new lines of inquiry. At the same time, the information you disseminate as a professor to your students has to be fact-based. It cannot be simply an opinion, a political promise. It has to be responsible to the point of view of the recipient, but also responsible because you hold a certain position of authority in informing young minds. And what seems to be missing in the current vernacular, certainly with individuals, people, and certain structures that do get rewarded for lies or misrepresentations, is the notion of responsibility for the position that these individuals or institutions hold in society, and certainly in front of future leaders, future intellectuals, folks who actually shape culture and shape society. And I think that is a significant challenge where, as you highlighted, on one hand, AI will create a recorded record of not only this conversation, but many others. And so we will be able to go back and say, oh my God, this guy said something that I disagree with, or this played out to be incorrect in the long term. At the same time, it does create a record that can be reviewed, can be improved, and doing this from a point of view of in a humanistic way and studying how people thought, speech, presentation, their language, body language included, has changed over the years to accommodate a different message, atmosphere, or belief, or even an audience. It is an interesting record to be looked at and examined. And I would like us to move sort of to our third pillar on that, which is the ultimate advantage of modern communication, something that you've hinted at, is cross-border collaboration, cross-culture collaboration, cross-language collaboration. The point of this entire institute is to bring people from different parts together to engage in exchange, but also find common sense of humanity. And you can't have humanity without humanities. And I say this as a STEM guy. So, have you seen that play out in a certain way, since your students are folks who have been pushed out or have left? They come from a foundation of a common language and cultural background, but they're in different environments. Have these tools helped them assimilate and interact with the new societies? Has it helped them to maintain community and build community? And how do you, as a leader of this dispersed community, continue not just the pedagogy, but the human engagement element using the very tools that we are relatively somewhat skeptical of?
It is a very you came to this question from a, let us say, from a different direction I expected, but thus it is more interesting. The problem is that at the very end of the Soviet Union, the problem of identity was one of the most serious and important at that time. Ethnic identity, for example. So we had a sort of supra-ethnic identity, the Soviets, the Soviets. We felt at certain moments ourselves very similar to the Americans, because the United States, melting pot, and. But on the other side, when the empire collapsed, the idea was that now everyone will have his own identity. Like in Yugoslavia, you will have Serbian identity, you will have Montenegro identity, and so on. But then the problem arises that some people in this community do not have a clear ethnic identity. They were created by the Soviet Union. They, not ideologically, but just personally, they have multiple identity. And multiple identity was seen as a sort of psychic disease. We all know that. And now we're in a situation when many young people, hundreds of them, are coming from former Russian Federation or from the Soviet Union or from Ukraine. They are coming to the free world, and they realize that they actually are developing their individual identity, what they are becoming. Because if you just are what you were born, you will never become anything. You cannot become somebody because you were born this. But to create your own identity, to build it, and to make it unsimilar with the identity of these cannibals from the Kremlin, so to say, just to become yourselves. You need languages, you need your own language, and you need some new language. You need several languages. You must speak several languages. So our obligation is, in this particular point, to develop a personal, linguistic, and human strategy to help these young people to develop this strategy. They should not be tied to the region where they were born or to the city where they were born. They should be tied with the social group they feel like their community. And that is a huge problem. And it is not only linguistic problem. We have many bilingual persons, for example, Russian, Ukrainian, but they are so shocked by the events in this part of the world that they say, I would rather choose the third language, maybe third Slavonic language. Maybe it will be Czech or it will be Serbian, not to be involved in this terrible war. So how to find peace within one particular faith? That's our, I would say that's our dream. And maybe after several decades, people of this generation will create another world where they could live. But right now, they must save themselves in their multiple identity, in their new identity they create with their mother tongue, but at the same time with other languages they are gaining right now.
And I'll just add this. One of the greatest assets of being in a city like New York is certainly the multicultural aspect of the city. And Robert Caro and many others who have reflected on the importance of New York, that at its peak during the Irish migration was 80%, the population was made up of 80% of those who weren't born in the United States. So I think it's important in the modern day where we look at human migration issues around migrants and the kind of national identity that Gasan talked about. It's important to highlight that this is not a moment that is also unprecedented on the question of people coming, changing, and immigrating. What I do think is also interesting is this balance between migration, cultural retention, and assimilation that roughly translates into the questions around the melting pot or the mixed salad and all of these dynamics that have been discussed ad nauseum and remain unresolved because ultimately it's about the person's relationship with their community, as Gasan highlighted in his response. And what was particularly interesting to me looking back, as this is going to be the 25th anniversary of 9/11, is a very important definitive moment, at least in my life and the history of my life in the West, um, was a poll conducted after the attack in terms of at what point do you go out there and protect your what you perceive to be your community? Do you go out there and protect the United States? Roughly 40% of New Yorkers said that. If New York State, 50%. But if somebody comes to the city, it was close to 95% said that they would be willing to protect the city. And I think it's important, again, as you talk about formation of identity, formation of personality, with this freedom to do that, and for the host country to understand the economic impacts of that migration, to understand the long-term, short-term benefits of that migration, I think is very important. So I see Ginger raising her hand, which means we should probably stop.
Well, I'm raising my hand because along these lines, we had talked previously about what the language that politicians use to galvanize their publics. And um, I think Gassan, your background in really understanding what the Kremlin was doing, what Putin was doing, and how he was approaching his publics, and sort of galvanizing a community there. What Trump has done in the US in galvanizing a community there with simply the use of language. Do you have comments about this? What we can take from this, what we can do about it?
Uh, I would say, although, coming back to New York first,
Yeah.
the book by Ross Perlin about languages in New York. I reviewed this book for the French radio and for our magazine. It's really a great book. But people who spend some time in Moscow, like Nina Buis, who is here, they know exactly that Moscow is a very multinational city. And her friends speaking Georgian, Abkhazian, Azerbaijani, and other languages, Tatar, they were all in this city. It was a very multinational city. And Russia as a country is a very multinational country. And there are lots of indigenous people, republics, and so on. In the year 2018, there was a new law signed by President Putin, which in fact forbids teaching in these languages. The only teaching language in Russia is Russian, and Russia is a state language, and other indigenous people in the country are losing their language with tremendous speed. It is just accelerating. That's number one. The number one is our language is the most powerful and the most valuable. Other languages are not valuable, are not interesting for us. They should not exist. That's the policy. Another problem is that about the Russian language itself. As soon as you misuse your language as language of control, language of violence, you expand the violence as the essence of existence of the people. That's why the main, let us say, the main level of Russian language now being in use in the country is obscene language. So Putin is the one who is constantly using obscene language, unheard by foreigners, but very well heard by people in Russia itself. He's using rhymes, or he's using some images from jokes, which are, in general, absolutely unbearable because of their obscene content. And he's speaking about Ukraine in the context of obscene jokes about raping Ukraine and so on. So the main instrument, the main ruling instrument of him is the instrument of violence and rape. And that's why it is so complicated nowadays outside Russia, because people cannot divide between being against Putin and Kremlin and his power and FSB, KGB, and so on, and being against Russia as such. Because in their hatred against Russian politics and Russian people in power, there is also a very heavy part of the hatred towards Russian language. So they created within this quarter of a century, starting, by the way, with the 9/11. That was our 9/11 was Putin coming to power. And he's still there. So starting with this date, there are 25 years of misusing Russian language as language of power and of humiliation of minorities, of humiliation of Russians themselves, and humiliating non-Russian Slavic people. That is a very, from this point of view, that is a very painful problem, because when we are speaking to somebody who is, let us say, coming, Russian-speaking people, there are many dozens, hundreds, thousands of them coming from the eastern part of Ukraine to Europe, and they are in a very complicated situation because their mother tongue is Russian, but they hate their Russian. So they hate themselves for the fact that they speak Russian, that they use this language. They are trying to learn Ukrainian, but it is very difficult to learn another different language, especially when they are relative. It's like German and English, or French and Italian. That is a very important point, and I think that we have to continue in this direction to analyze this situation and to help people to realize that their language has actually nothing to do with these people who are now in charge.
There's certainly, I think, Gasan, to your point, there's a little bit of overlap. Personally, from an immigrant experience, I wanted to distance from my Russianness as much as possible. There was very little pride in that identity. There was very little happiness or joyful memories in that identity. But of course, you carry your family, your heritage, your name with you for the entirety of your life unless you choose to completely pretend like that doesn't exist. And that's not a choice that I nor many others have made. I think it's an interesting question of rejection, and you pointed it to the question of humiliation of other cultures and the notion of subservience to the Russian culture on that side. In the US, I would argue that it's economic opportunity that creates an economic imperative for both integration and certainly professional and personal development. And whether certain state laws will adjust to the languages in various cultures, it does raise a different question, especially as we're gearing up for the 250th anniversary, is what does it mean to be an American? What is our national identity? What is our national purpose? And it's interesting, comical, and informative and tragic all at the same time, which I think is a
Yes.
very Russian combination into this huge matzo ball of a problem, um, of asking, what is this all about right now? And how do we reconcile those questions and differences? And because it is, there's always a grain of truth, which is without purpose, you can't really define a country. You can't really define a people.
Well,
And
and a further point Nick Ilgen raises is there are, millions in Russia who dislike the Kremlin, who dislike the administration, who can't talk because if
yeah,
they do, they're arrested.
and I would, as much chaos as we've seen in our streets in the last few years, that is a way to diffuse, release the pressure, to try to handle this in a community of like-minded people, marching with a group of like-minded people. And whether you agree with them or not, that is our way of diffusing the situation. Whereas, unfortunately, Russia has a history of repression, and ultimately the pressure cooker breaks. And then you have to start fresh again. And some would point to the reverence for constitution and rule of law, which again is being challenged in many different ways, versus no such culture. That is a main difference. And so I think Nick points very accurately to the inability of dissidents to publicly dissent, for the inability of people to publicly gather. And when they do, they face severe consequences where the payment for that level of freedom and expression enshrined in the First Amendment here is too high. It's simply too high. Now, does this mean that our normative values should be projected on the rest of the world as superior? No. I think we've learned that from our experience in Iraq and certainly in Afghanistan, that the certain normative behaviors cannot be brought in and imported in. We certainly weren't welcomed as liberators. But fundamentally, um, certain cultures will resolve their problems differently, and we will resolve our problems differently. But the way we communicate, whether directly through language that is aggressive, repressive, that is reinforced by the state, versus through seeding doubt, seeding questions, pretending that certain scientific processes have no meaning and certain other facts are not to be trusted and that experts have nothing to add, is certainly a challenge that we face, not just in the academy, where you worry about academic integrity, but you worry about public integrity and fundamental facts. If you undercut them enough, you undercut the humanity of your fellow citizen, and you completely erode the exchange and the trust to have a conversation that potentially leads to serious, serious cultural disruptions and certainly civilizational disruptions, that where we see one another, because the product is nothing but demonization of the other, and that is very dangerous in a multicultural society.
Yeah. Nina, you had a question. Think about the profanity and obscenity in our political discourse, the language used by our president and his administration, which, to your point, Gasan, I mean, I think that is a key issue that's happening in the US now. And how do we receive this, and how does it actually influence ultimately policy?
You know, it is it is a very, again, a very good and important question. My personal problem is that I have been studying Russian obscenities as philological subject while writing a book on Aristophanes on Greek comedy, because the Greek obscenities are much stronger, so to say, than the Russian or the American ones. It is unbelievable. But the problem is that in Russia, this language has never been properly studied, which means it has never been taught in schools, in the universities, because it was a closed, forbidden subject. And on the contrary, in the West, in Germany and in the United States, in England, there are lots and lots of studies, academic studies of the subject. When you study it, when you make it a university discipline, then it's going down. It's being used as a sort of art, as some point of literature, poetry, and so on. And we recently published a book of Russian rhymes, obscene rhymes, but taken in their original form, not in their politicized form. The terrible thing in the new American experience of this sort and the Russian experience in this sort is that there is a presupposition that everybody loves and uses obscenities and profanity, that it is normal. That's why when I say something, not saying it directly, but meaning it, and at the same times with the presupposition that you do understand what I mean, because you are of the same material as I am. Don't think that you are nice. Don't think that you're educated. Don't think that you are clever. You are the same rubbish as I am. And that's what he says. And unfortunately, from this point of view, when you have many people of this sort, and when they all somehow are going up, then it is complicated to communicate, because then you are staying in the shadow of these idiots, and you have to start speaking the same way. That's the problem. And of course, that's the problem in Russia. And Nick wrote about many people who are, so to say, muted. They cannot say anything because they know that they will get imprisoned for it. And I cannot say a bad word against them, because I fled 2020 because they said that I'm on the side of terrorists, and I'm a terrorist, and I don't want to get personal, so to say, but I do know that some of my friends and good acquaintances, they are sitting in prison for their language.
Yeah.
They are sitting there. One of them is a philosopher, Nikolai Zhuzhev. He is from Komi. He is the scholar of Pitirim Sorokin, so a very famous American scientist of Russian Komi origin. And Nikolai Zhuzhev came back to Syktyvkar, to his motherland, to teach Komi and to make them acquainted with Pitirim Sorokin.
Yeah.
And he was imprisoned for separatism.
Yeah.
He is now sitting for 8 years in prison. A person like you and me,
Yeah.
without any political ambitions or something, just with one idea. I want to explain to my Komi people their great compatriot who became a great American sociologist. And and that is all based on the idea that this guy is against Russia and for Komi separatism.
Hmm.
You
Yeah,
you see
the
uh,
irony.
my
Yeah.
point. Yeah, the
Yeah.
irony of yeah.
So, one question from Jen in the audience is the sort of kitchen table discussion in Russia still happening? And I know Gasan and Lev, neither of you have been there in a while. Nick, you have. Nina has more recently, I think. Does it still take place? Is the kitchen table still a safe place for these more intellectual political discussions in Russia, or has that
So
been
I'll
abandoned?
defer to Nick on this on the specifics of this, but I will just say that
Masha too.
Jennifer, great to see you and thank you for coming. But also, it's uh, I can't imagine the kind of exchanges that were happening back then to happen now, and I'm it's possible that I'm 100% wrong, but it's even then when my mom in one of her many books reflected on those days of sitting around a kitchen table debating the world with folks in your circle. It's like your COVID-19 pod. These were your most trusted people. There was at least one who would quickly write a report on what was happening anyway. Now, to imagine a mechanized robotic process that would do that for the state, both in transcription, reporting, and then the output is a very real threat. But I don't know if this happens, but I would defer to Nick on this.
Yeah, and Masha too. You're here. You've
Well,
just been there.
can you hear me?
Well, you're echoing because you're on two devices.
Oh, God. Sorry. I don't know why, but still. Anyway,
We can't do it. I think it's not going to work, unfortunately.
If you just turn off your phone or something.
can
Yes.
you hear me?
Yes.
Okay, sorry. Yeah, last week I was in several kitchens, and I can tell you one thing. If there's more than one person, like 3 or 4 who don't belong to the family, talking, then no one's going to mention the war, Putin, Ukraine, and so on. If it's 1-to-1, then, well, someone will want to take a walk outside, but otherwise, so that you're not overheard, speak somewhere else, and 1-to-1, yeah, they'll talk about it, quite frankly. I mean, they're not brainwashed by the TV and all that stuff. And so they can formulate their opinion. These are people which cannot emigrate from Russia like hundreds of thousands did because either they got old parents, either they don't have the means, either they don't have the right profession. And so they're stuck there, but they're still valuable human beings.
Yeah.
And so basically it's a sorrow picture, but it's like that.
Got it.
Masha,
Yeah.
do you want to weigh in as well?
Well, it might be long, but I don't think I should really interrupt. I had spent 1 month in April, May in Russia, and I can tell you it was my mom's 90th anniversary, and we had a big reception there because she's a professor, she's well known. So in this reception, like in old Soviet time, in her 3-room apartment, we had people in every room around 35 and everything was absolutely open. The discussion was for me as it was in 1990s or 200s, so I didn't most of the people who are from scientific community, different generations, but they spoke quite openly, and they were just happy that that was their own society, and they were not scared to discuss the political views. That's how I feel. And to tell the truth, after being there, I decided to go again. So in the mid of July, I'm going there for 1.5 months because I think I have to bring something positive to the people who are kind of suffering, and I feel that they need me. And I have a grandson there, so I think, and I have colleagues with whom I'm in touch. So basically, being careful but still spreading good thoughts. I don't think it's dangerous at some point for me,
That's great.
but I think it's important.
Thank you, Masha. It's a good perspective. I am going to just let everybody know we will be closing the Zoom in 5 minutes. I just ask you, or actually 10 minutes, I just ask you to whatever questions you have, if you could pop them in the chat, that would be great. And then we can raise them with everybody. Jim, you have a question.
Yeah, just it's a recommendation for everybody, and maybe we've seen this movie, but Mr. Nobody Against Putin
Hmm.
is playing on Canopy. If you have that streaming service, I think it's all over the country now, and
Yeah.
you can find it there. I watched it. I was very impressed by it. It's very well made. It's very heartfelt, and it shows a range of opinions, but also a lot of scared people uh, living under a very brutal and scared local administration, educational mostly. But yeah, if you haven't seen it, I would see it. It's very up to date on what's going on in Russia, and thank God that guy got out okay before they caught him.
Yeah. Well, it's something I wanted to say to Gasan and to Lev is thank you for the work you're doing because the education of young people wherever they are is so vital. And from what I can gather from having seen that film, but also from, various things I've read, the education of young people is being compromised. It's happened in this country. It's been a slow and highly effective process to effectively dummy down the population so that critical thinking skills are simply not developed over time in a lot of the US public schools. It sounds like there's a lot of that happening right now in schools in Russia, particularly in the elementary schools. And so the importance of providing an online opportunity for young people as they grow up and can access other channels is really vital. So thank you for that work. So important. Any other questions before we?
There's Evelyn, I believe, has a question.
Oh, yeah. Great. Oh, Evelyn Messenger is asking, and for you to answer or not answer as you wish, Gasan, how were you characterized as a terrorist by the Russian government?
Uh, uh, First of all, Putin called me Russophobe because of my publication, and then there was a discussion in the Facebook about uh, about how to understand the Chechen struggle for independence, the Chechen terrorism. And I said that what is terrorism for you was for Chechens the struggle for independence. And then they said that I am someone who wants to struggle for terrorism. And so they accused me of supporting terrorists.
Wow.
Just for this for this comment.
Yeah. Yeah.
but there are more details about it. And actually, there is one last question by Jim, which is very interesting. Socrates was worried about losing memory function by switching from oral to written culture. How he was prescient when we discover our panic around the missing smartphone. It's great. But actually, there is a very short answer why they predicted it all. Because the